Booker T. Jones joins me here in Studio Q. Hello.
Hello, Shad.
So it's hard to believe that track is 50 years old. Where does your mind go when you hear Green Onions?
Oh, just now I was feeling pretty fortunate and thankful to have been playing with that particular rhythm section of Steve Cropper on guitar and Al Jackson on drums and Louis Steinberg on bass.
Just feeling gratitude for being part of that ensemble.
Yeah, just listening to that track and how solid it was, and it was such a long time ago, and I was actually a part of it. Actually feeling gratitude.
That's interesting that you say that because I saw an interview with Steve Cropper and Duck, and they said you were the musician in the band. They were just playing along.
Well, I trained myself, but we were all musicians. I got the formal training. I'm the one that bucked the company and went to college in 1962 and got 4 years of musical education at Indiana University. So I think that's what they were referring to.
But they must have meant, so what do you think it was about their playing if they didn't have that training? They just had the groove, they just had the...
Well, I was fortunate enough to get both ends of it. I grew up in the same school of music in the Memphis streets and the Memphis clubs that they did. And that was pretty much you could call it a groove school.
I've heard you said that you still learn new things when you listen to that song. What do you mean?
Oh, well, I had an intention when I was playing the song, actually in the recording session, and I have not been able to recreate that in all these years, so I still try to do that.
Intention, what do you mean?
It's a pretty tight groove, and it lasted for, 2.5, 3 minutes. And the way I was playing the organ, I try to recreate it, and I'm not able to do it exactly.
Is that why you think the song stood the test of time? Because it had that magic?
Yes, maybe it was really a special moment.
And how did the writing of that song come about? Because you were just a teenager.
I was a music theory student in 12th grade, 11th grade at Booker Washington in Memphis in preparation for taking the jury at Indiana, studying music in different ways chords would be put together. And that was one of my aberrations. That wasn't the normal chord change of 1, 3, 4. Usually chords back then, blues, we played a 1 chord and then a 4 chord and then a 1 chord and then a 5 chord back to a 4. But this was a 1, 3, 4. And a minor 3. So I was experimenting, coming up with that chord change.
And that seems to be a special high school that you went to. You talk about the Memphis school. David Porter, who wrote with Isaac Hayes, went there. You had some illustrious classmates.
It was. They had a great jazz band, and the jazz combo came over to my junior high school and played, and that pretty much inspired me to try to get into playing, R&B and jazz music.
And there's been a lot of speculation about where that song title comes from.
Well, we were somewhat mavericks back then. I mean, we had a bass player that was a little bit raunchy, and he wanted to call it Funky Onions. But it was 1962. The company was owned by Jim Stewart, a banker, a part-time banker, and his sister, Estelle Axton. His name was Jim Stewart. Her name was Estelle. And we were in Memphis, Tennessee, extremely conservative, wanting to put out a record. And she said, you can't call that song Funky Onions here in the South in 1962. Why not call it Green Onions?
And there's also a lot of speculation about your band name, the origins of that.
Yeah. You mean the MG part of it?
The MG part of it, yeah.
Well, you're asking me that because you know the truth. And the truth is that it was named after the British Leyland car, the MG, which was belonged to the engineer Chips Moment. It was parked outside. He had probably been doing some wheelies out there. But British Leyland was inconsistent in their responses to us, I'll put it that way. So I decided to call the band the Memphis Group in response.
Part of what makes that song so famous is the sound of the B3. How did that instrument come into your life?
That came about as a result of my taking piano lessons, and my piano teacher was also a B3 organ teacher. I hadn't known that in the beginning, but she had one in her dining room, which I mistook for the cabinet. I mistook it for a china cabinet, and but I saw a student sitting in there one day with music books, and I asked her what it was, and she opened up the instrument and showed me that it was an organ that B3 organ, and played a few notes on it, and gave me the information that I didn't have enough money to take lessons on that particular instrument. So I got an additional paper route and earned enough to start taking organ lessons.
And you're sitting at the B3 now. What is it that captured your imagination?
It is a consummate instrument. It's in the key of C, like most keyboards. However, it's a combination of a synthesizer and an organ. There are no pipes, but the sounds are synthesized, and you can mix them together with drawbars. So it's a different type of instrument. It's a little bit of a hybrid, I guess you could call it.
Do you remember what it felt like when you touched it for the first time?
Yes, well, I was under the auspices of a very strict piano teacher and a very strict organ teacher, and touching it for the first time was a tenuous situation.
Were you like afraid of breaking it type of thing?
No. She was teaching me Bach, and so there was a certain curvature to the finger, there was a certain approach to it, there was a certain touch.
And is there a certain joy to this particular instrument that captured you?
Yes, I learned that from other people, listening to other people play, in particular people like Bill Doggett, who was just really had a happy organ. As a matter of fact, even Dave Baby Cortez had a song called The Happy Organ when I was a kid that I would emulate. And Ray Charles, of course, was the master of the instrument. He didn't play the B3, he played a smaller version, the M3. And he played the solo on Quincy Jones's One Mint Julep. And that was the solo that made me decide I wanted to try to play this instrument.
Do you still know that solo?
Oh, no, I don't. I can't play it. I am not and cannot play like Ray Charles. No.
Despite your love of this particular instrument, it was actually the baritone saxophone that got you in at sax. You forgot to add tuba to that list of instruments that you play.
Yes, tuba was a little bit later. That was in the high school band.
And how were you able to try out all these different instruments that you learned?
They were available in the public schools, in the band room. The oboe, my very first instrument that I played in the band was provided by Memphis public school system, and they had a number of clarinets available, and kids could just walk in and check them out, take them home, and take lessons from the band director.
But there couldn't have been a lot of multi-instrumentalists as a result of that. You had this natural inclination.
Yeah, I may have been one of a few that had curiosity to go from one instrument to the other.
And from reeds to other sorts of instruments.
Reeds to brass. Reeds to brass.
So you became a session musician for Stax while you were still in high school. For our listeners, could you give us a list of some of the artists you worked with at that label?
First session I think was with William Bell, who became my partner. And there was the family, Rufus Thomas and Carla Thomas. And there was Otis Redding.
Do you remember meeting Otis Redding for the first time?
Yes, I remember meeting Otis. He was driving for a band called Johnny and the Pine Toppers. He was the gopher, and he took the instruments in, took care of the luggage, and picked up the sandwiches and that type of thing, and drove them from Georgia to Tennessee. And when I first saw him, he was unloading their instruments on the sidewalk in front of Satellite.
Do you remember the first time you heard him sing?
Yes, he sat right next to me and sang a few phrases of These Arms of Mine.
And you've said that working on those sessions for These Arms of Mine and sitting on the dock of the bay were particularly pleasurable and memorable for you. What was it about those sessions?
Well, just to be in the presence of someone like Otis Redding, someone who is as dedicated and someone who is as focused and who has that type of persona is memorable. You don't forget any of the moments you spend with him. He became a friend of mine. And then to be making music with someone like that is plain inspiring. His presence and his purpose causes music to well up inside me. It's a lot of the lines that ended up on the music was just inspired by by being around him and listening to him sing and being involved.
What was the goal of Stax? What were they trying to achieve musically as a label?
What a question. What a question. The honest answer is there were a number of agendas there. As a company, the goal was to make original, simple, accessible music based on the blues, and just basically to have a good time and enjoy ourselves.
Was that spirit of fun always there?
No, it was difficult at times. Many times it was difficult. The end result made it worth it, but at times it was a struggle. Sometimes the music just wouldn't come, but many times it did. And of course, everything else would get in the way. All the logistics, the business. Mm-hmm.
I want to circle back for a second. You mentioned Indiana University and your time there studying music.
Mm-hmm.
You were doing that while working with Booker T and the MGs.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like going between the two worlds?
Well, that's an example of what I was saying before. It wasn't always easy. I made the decision at that time in my life to not not put my college education off. Everybody wanted me to wait 3 or 4 years, and I didn't do it. I went when I was 18. So it was difficult. I had to drive 8 hours from Bloomington, Indiana, to get to Memphis to get to the sessions. So on Friday afternoon, as soon as I was out of class, I was in the car headed towards Memphis, and I played Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and then right back. And then summers, so there was a lot of travel. It was difficult, and then it made it not only logistically different, but it wasn't easy going to school and working there.
Were you hearing any of your records as you were on your drives?
Yes, I was. That was gratifying. And the other students on campus heard it too, so that was nice.
You've described your organ playing style as crawling. Could you tell us what that means and where that comes from?
I don't always play like that. That was
on the Stax sound, though.
Yeah, so I didn't always use that, but it was one of the techniques that my teacher taught me, Mrs. Cole, to take advantage of the Hammond organ as opposed to the piano. The organ has the ability to hold notes, whereas the notes die out on other stringed instruments like a guitar or a piano. But an organ, you can hold one instrument, you can play one note while holding another. So that's what's called crawling. But I don't always use that.
Would you be interested in showing us what crawling looks like?
Well, let's see if I can make it so.
Okay. So you're holding the lowest note there.
Yeah, so, but here comes the crawling. The crawling is when you cross over.
Ah.
Whatever. Mm-hmm.
And that's a technique that your teacher taught you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Booker T and the MGs was a multiracial band. How did segregation at that time affect the band?
Very, very deeply. We had to work within that framework. It wasn't so much in effect inside the doors of Stax as it was outside, and we always had to go outside. So when we went outside as a group, we were an interracial group in 1962 in Memphis, Tennessee.
Touring must have been where it showed up the most, yeah?
Yes, it would have been probably better had we been a football team or something rather than a musical group, because it was just not the right thing to be doing at that time.
Were there any particularly difficult moments?
Every moment outside the door was difficult because it was the South. It was difficult for blacks even without the whites, and then for blacks with whites, it was even more complicated.
Was the Stax building then one of the only refuges from that?
Yes, we had, our other refuge, of course, was the Lorraine Motel, where we had our meetings and where we took our meals. But yes, there were not many places where we could go and not be really aware of that aspect, the interracial aspect.
Were you in Memphis in 1968 when Martin Luther King was killed?
Yes, I was. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that moment?
Yes, I do. The marches had begun, and it was emotional upheaval for me and everyone I knew, and it was devastating for the movement of getting basically salaries and money for the men who were keeping the city afloat, the people who were carrying the tin cans on their backs down the alleyways and who were picking up the trash for years and driving the dangerous trucks were not making enough money to support their families, and everyone knew it. And there was a huge resistance against paying them a decent wage. The resistance was it was unfathomable how strong it was, the oppression. So there was no way the elements, the African American or the white elements in the city could come together on that. So we needed help, and the help was Dr. Martin Luther King. He was the only one that could make a difference, and to take him out of the equation was just unbelievable.
Did it affect everyone at Stax differently?
I can't say how it affected everyone at Stax. I cannot go inside different people. I can say that if there was a fissure in the company, it made it larger because that type of thing was just too strong an event. It affected the whole world, including Stax.
50 years later, does it surprise you to still see the kind of violence we just saw in Charleston?
That type of violence is being taught through rhetoric. Rhetoric is not something that we're able to control. Rhetoric comes from things that people write and people say, and then other people believe them. It comes from the inside. And I think Dr. King's life was an extremely important one in terms of affecting that type of rhetoric. I for one am still hopeful that the man's dream will come true.
And the music of the time spoke into that rhetoric as well. Had the privilege of speaking with Mavis Staples and talking about the impact of music at that time. How did you watch that change?
I'm not...
Sorry, the sort of music speaking into a social situation. How have you observed that change?
Well, that was one of the things that died along with Dr. King. I think Dr. King was carrying a lot of weight when he was with us. And one of the things that he was carrying was the responsibility of all of the artists, all the filmmakers, all the songwriters, all the musicians, all of the African-American art had that goal in mind.
So he was inspiring a lot of art.
Inspiring a lot of things. And so when that figurehead disappeared, I think a lot of the relevance of the music, as far as that particular goal left, I think the music went on to reflect the society as it was. So the society began to decay and deteriorate more.
Skipping ahead a couple years, I'd be kicking myself if I didn't ask you about Bill Withers. What was it like to work with him?
Well, Bill was one of the first people I produced when I went to California. I had a ranch out in Malibu, and a business associate, a fellow named Clarence Avant, had discovered Bill. He discovered him building airplane toilets in Inglewood. And Clarence called up one day and said, I really think you should hear this guy sing. I wanted to send him out to the ranch. So he sent Bill out to the ranch one morning, and he showed up in his brogans and overalls and big boots. But he had this guitar and this big notebook full of songs, and the first one that he sang for me was Ain't No Sunshine.
Wow. What did you think when you heard that the first time?
I didn't I loved it, and then he sang another one and another one. He went from that, I think, to Grandma's Hands, and then just, the whole morning was like that. So I just got on the phone and started calling studios and musicians.
They're such interesting songs. How did you make those production choices that were right for him?
Ooh, that's a good question. That was so hard. And a number of the songs that I didn't choose, he did with the Crusaders, and some of them he did with the Watts 103rd Street Band. Some of the best songs. It was so hard to choose because all his songs were great. He had Lean on Me and A Beautiful Day, and it was just so hard.
Lean on Me, that just hearing the name of that song gives me chills because it's a song that belongs to everyone. And that's so rare. It's so rare. It's like a hymn almost.
But I'm almost glad it happened because he ended up working with people like Joe Sample and James Gadson, and just great musicians, that I wouldn't have been able to hire Joe Sample.
Why is it so important for you to work with different styles of music?
I don't think I made it important. It's just that I like different styles. It was expected when I grew up in Memphis, playing saxophone, and the people that I was hanging with, that I would be a jazz musician. But I just wasn't good enough on any one instrument to play jazz.
And Abbey Road is another one from a kind of another genre that struck you.
Pop, British pop. By the time they became superstars, the Beatles, that is, they had just eclipsed and became, consummate musicians in terms of pop. So I wanted to pay tribute to them.
And at what point did you learn that they were huge fans of your work?
Later. I'd run into them inadvertently at different places, at clubs in London, but I never knew that they really paid any attention to what we did.
What do you think is the secret to your longevity?
You mean my musical longevity?
Your musical longevity, first of all.
Oh, thank you. I feel like the same musician that I was when I was 4 or 5 years old, the same drive, the same creative force is there. I can't really describe it. It's just something inside me that is like a musical player, that I hear music playing in my mind and or in my sleep, and my job is to try to control it or to make it practical, and at times to try to remember the music I hear in my mind, or make it something that works in the real world.
Did you suspect that would always be with you, or did you imagine at some point you'd be doing something else, that music player inside of you would shut down at some point?
No, I have never really considered that. I never anticipated it. It was just always there, and I imagine it's there in a lot of people. I know it was there in my mother, and I speak at music schools sometimes, and it's there in the students.
I want to end just back at this instrument here. What do you think would have happened if you had never discovered that B3 in your music teacher's house as a kid?
If I hadn't discovered the B3, I think I would probably be playing a lot more strings, guitar, probably clarinet, saxophone.
Well, you do have that whole range of colors to paint with. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me, Shad.